"We have a problem," Strauss said, after being let in. The warden sighed and shrugged. "Don't we always? It's a prison, after all." "Yes, but it's a little more serious than usual. Sergeant Forks says that he's been having trouble with the outside grounds crew." The warden lifted an eyebrow. "Are they after more gain time or something? Because most of them are lucky they even get out these days." "I believe he said most of them just want to come back alive." The warden sat up a little straighter. "Strauss, what the hell are you talking about?" "Squads 2 and 3 had to come back early yesterday. There was talk about a cougar attack, and most of them do have injuries. Some of them will be in the infirmary for quite a while, but most of them made it back to the van and back to the compound." The warden exhaled loudly, steepling his fingers before him on the desk. "I don't think it was cougars, Strauss, but I want you to tell Miss Evergreen that I need to speak with her." "It sounds like it might not be enough to have the ghoul crew in the laundry room. We might have to branch out a little more and start them on outside grounds, too." "Sir, if I may," Strauss said, adjusting his glasses, "I don't understand this. How is she doing any of—" The warden raised a finger. "Tut, tut, tut, Strauss. Yours is not to question why. Yours is to crunch numbers and keep the lights on. Understand?" Strauss opened his mouth, then closed it again, looking ridiculously like a fish before finally shaking his head and leaving. The warden stood and walked darkly to the catwalk that ran around the top of the tower. He glowered at the woods, the trees swaying in the wind mockingly. They had dared to attack his people. They had never dared before, but he supposed it was their new leadership. He was encroaching, getting closer and closer each day. But the warden still had some tricks up his sleeve. They would find that stretch between the woods and the prison harder to breach than they believed, and he would enjoy watching the things that lived beneath the turf, the warden's grass, he supposed, drag them down and devour them. It had taken a lot of training to get them to ignore the work squads, but after the incident today, the creatures that made up his army were given no such quarter. "You want to take my prison? Good luck. I think you'll find it a little more difficult than you believe." He wondered what had happened to Cribbs at that moment. Cribbs had been in there for a month, but he'd heard nothing of the leader of these horrors being killed. He supposed that, if Cribbs had done his job, then he never would, but he didn't know if that'd be enough to make the attacks stop either. The warden sighed. Only time would tell. The rabbit was alive 1 minute and dead the next. Inmate B50967 dropped from the tree and rolled the rock off the rabbit before pushing it into his pack. He had 2 rabbits, a pheasant he'd caught in a similar manner, and 2 skins of rainwater he'd managed to collect in a tarp he'd set up. He had to go pretty high to get the rainwater, and B50967 wasn't as small as he had been when his father had taught him how to collect rainwater and dew, and the other little presents the woods saw fit to give a man living rough. He had to get it high, though, because the rainwater never touched the ground in these woods. B50967 didn't know how that could be, but it was the truth. B50967 took his provisions and went to the fire pit. He had taken branches from high up, where the whatever it was couldn't ruin them. They burned just fine, and he set the moss against them. He smiled as the moss took fire and the sticks began to crackle. It was good, but it had taken some learning to get here. B50967 had spent his first 2 weeks learning the woods, and it had nearly killed him more than once. He shuddered as he remembered those days of white-knuckle survival. The warden had warned him that it would be bad out here. The warden had warned him that there were monsters out there. The warden had warned him that if he wasn't very, very careful, he would be dead. The warden hadn't told him that everything in the woods was spoiled. Not rotten, not poisonous. Spoiled. Anything below the upper canopy, B50967 had discovered, was possessed of a rot that made it unusable and potentially dangerous. The animals were okay during the daytime, but the plant life was always suspect. They burned poorly and gave off a lot of smoke, like wet wood. It gave off no heat, and sometimes B50967 believed that it brought attention to him. You never saw the creatures during the day, but there were other creatures in the woods too, creatures that didn't mind the sun. The animals might be normal enough during the day, but after dark, they were as strange as the monsters. The deer would grow extra eyes and strange coats. The rabbits had rows of sharp teeth and odd growths on the back of their heads. And the birds, well, birds here were not the usual night singers. They were vicious. Their cries sounded like dying children, and if they caught you near their nests, then you'd better be prepared to protect your eyes. Then, of course, there was Marcus Reese, the ghost of Stragview Woods, to contend with. He had seen him a few times, usually at dusk or in the early evening. Marcus Reese, age 38, male, once housed in E451, DC number A56609, was one of the few escapees to ever make it out of Stragview and survive the woods. The picture the warden had of him was of a slightly gregarious man with a ratty, pinched face, but Reese was nothing like the picture now. He was a wraith, a ghost that haunted the woods, and he strode around like some kind of phantom as he contemplated whatever it was that kept his mind busy these days. He was never alone, and it seemed like he always had 2 or 3 of the dog things with him. He was worried about being caught unaware, even on his home turf, and B50967 could appreciate that. He was a worthy adversary, but B50967 wondered if Reese was half the killer he was. Killer or not, he was going to be harder to kill than the warden had thought. The first hurdle had been the forest, but the second had been water. B50967 had been hunting his target with little luck for the first week and a half, and after 12 days, the water he had was running low. He supposed the dog things didn't have to worry about water, because he had found no running water in the woods. Not a puddle, not a stagnant pool, not even a dry stream bed to mark where something had been. It was dry as a bone, and B50967 had begun to panic a little. It had rained, but it never made it past the upper boughs. That was when he began to set up the rain catchers and the dew collectors. It wasn't much, but it kept him going, and that would allow him to complete his mission. Whatever happened after that was nothing to him. If he died with Reese's blood on his hands, torn apart by his monsters, then that would be okay. He would die at the climax of the greatest hunt he had ever embarked on, and that would be a worthy end. The rabbits and the pheasants cooked up well, and he was careful to put them in sealed bags, the ones the warden had provided him. The rabbits he would eat today, and the pheasant he would eat for breakfast and part of lunch. It would keep him going for another day, and that was what he needed. One day at a time. That was how one lived out here. The second problem was safety. The creatures roamed the forest floor during the night, and he had found that sleeping in trees was necessary. Trees were plentiful, but they were mostly pines and firs, and some of them could be treacherous. There were other native trees scattered throughout, but most of them were thin and less likely to hold him if he went up high. He'd spent his first 2 or 3 nights in the thinnest of sleeps, waking often to make sure that the strap that was holding him was still attached. Then, on day 4, he had found the thick old oak. The oak was massive, the kind of tree you'd expect to see in a Halloween display or holding a kid's treehouse. It poked above the canopy and seemed to be the perfect place to settle himself. The base also had a thick system of roots that jutted out of the ground and provided a great place to hide his fires and supplies. The first night he spent there, it appeared he wasn't the only one who thought it was so great. From the upper branches, he saw the pack of beasts come charging by and had gotten his first look at Reese. They camped at the base of the tree often, and if they suspected him of being there, they gave no sign. Reese sat amongst them, just contemplating and speaking to the beasts as if they understood him. B50967 observed him, making notes and plans of his own, but the pack was always gone by morning. He didn't know what they were doing during the day, and he wasn't curious enough to go looking. B50967 was also careful not to put his dew or rain collectors near the trees. He didn't often leave much around the big oak to give him away, but tonight he had decided he might make an exception. Tonight he wanted to try something different, something that might help him in his plans to bring down Reese and free himself of both the warden and the forest. He looked to the sky. It was about 1 in the afternoon, he judged, and he had about 5 or 6 hours until the sun started to sink. It wouldn't be true dark for another 7 hours, and by then, he had to be in his tree and secured. B50967 judged he had time for another hunt, and this one might be a little more difficult. He took out his hide map that he'd been making, the images crudely drawn with charcoal. The tree was in the center, his collectors marked all around in other badly drawn trees, and off to the west, left, was a wide open place he thought of as the meadow. There was no question what the creatures ate. The deer here were plentiful, and if he'd had a bow or a gun, B50967 could have eaten venison any time he wanted. As it stood, they were too skittish to let him get close enough to brain them with a rock, but he thought he had an answer to that. B50967 had been saving some of the bags from the provisions the warden had given him, and some of them had quite a bit of salt. When he was starving, it had taken a lot not to lick those bags, but he had told himself that he might need them for something bigger. That something, it seemed, was here. B50967 set up his trap on the edge of the meadow and laid the open packets out in the center. It wasn't much, a trifling offer, but the deer here weren't likely to encounter people very often. Flashy packages and the remnants of salt and sugar might catch their attention, and that was all he would need. By the time the sun began to sink, B50967 was ready. The deer liked to graze here in the early afternoon. B50967 had been observing them, and as the sun set and they began to gather for a feed, he saw a young doe take another look at his bait. It was subtle at first, the deer sniffing and hesitantly approaching, as B50967 hunkered on the branch and waited. She sniffed, she checked, she sniffed again, and then she began to lick at the bag that lay on the rock amidst his snare. He let her lick, let her get distracted, and then he rolled off the limb, rope in hand, and the snare yanked her up into the tree, where she bucked and cried. The other deer scattered, alarmed by the screaming doe, and B50967 tied the rope off before her jerking could attract attention. He climbed back up, careful not to lose his footing in the excitement, and reached the branch where the doe jerked and fought. The knife put a stop to that, and as she hung, her blood dribbling onto the ground of the meadow, B50967 got to work. He had the deer mostly butchered, a sloppy job, but it didn't have to be perfect, and stored before true nightfall. Tonight would be another one of those thin sleep nights, as he dangled from the boughs of the tree, but it didn't matter. He had the bait, and soon he would set a much bigger trap. Soon, his operation would truly begin.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's show. If you think you might like a little more spooky in your life, then please feel free to click on one of the videos we have up here. Maybe look at one of the playlists if you're trying to get caught up. I know, there's so many videos on the channel. There's so many series that are going at the same time. Sometimes you just need a little refresher course, and I gotta say, I always enjoy the views. If you're not subscribed, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Maybe hit the bell so you don't miss anything. We upload a lot on this channel, so you won't want to miss a single story as they come out. If you'd like to support the channel, you can click on the Amazon link down there. There's quite a few books in my Amazon account. You can have a look, and if you'd like a signed copy, get up with me through email, and I'll be happy to work something out with you. Also, there's links to my Patreon, and you can become a member on the channel if you'd like your spooky a little bit early. Patrons and members on the $5 tier get their videos 12 hours early. That's in the morning as opposed to in the evening. Patrons at the $10 level also get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one. Speaking of my patrons, you should see them appearing right now. Just wanted to take a minute to say how much I appreciate all of you. Patrons, subscribers, however you give to the channel. I really appreciate everything you do, and it truly touches me that you have chosen to support the channel in this way. Well, that's enough for now. Till next time, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.